Hello everyone, this is GR5S. Welcome back to my tarot channel. Today's video is going to be a little bit different because we are actually not going to be going over any tarot card definitions. Instead, today I'm actually just going to be reviewing a few decks and discussing them. And why am I doing this? Well, there are a ton of tarot decks, and so if you're just sort of starting your journey and you're unsure of which deck you want, hopefully you'll find this helpful. Because there are just so many different things to consider. Because even though a lot of decks do use the Rider-Waite system, a lot of them are just aesthetically different, or they sometimes on occasion sort of have a dual divination purpose, if you will, for lack of a better word. So I'm just going to show you a few decks. Two of these are currently out of print, but I think that this information will still be useful, and will still just give you things to look at and to think about as you might be thinking about purchasing a new deck or your first deck. So on our left side here, this is the traditional Rider-Waite based tarot card. This is sort of the original deck that made it very popular. It's not the very first deck ever of existence, but this is the one that is the most sort of popular. And this is what a lot of other cards are sort of based off of. Now the Rider-Waite based can also come in what's known, I think, as brilliant, so the colors might be a little bit sharper. I want to say there's more of a golden hue deck out there. Okay, this card is again a little bit bigger than your average sort of playing card. Okay, so a lot of these when you're shuffling, you'll have to get used to expanding your hand a little bit wider for that purpose. If you enjoy doing that sort of shuffling technique where you sort of flick them both down and do that little bridge thing. The stock quality is usually pretty similar throughout decks, but over time, in general, deck stock quality has sort of dropped a little, for lack of a better word, just because people, of course, want to save money on making them and see how much they can get. But, for beside the point, but it is a good sort of working deck. So if you're looking to do this in sort of a more paid, I guess, setting, and a more sort of frequent volume, you want a stock quality that's a little hardier, in my personal opinion. If you're like me and want to keep your cards forever and ever. Now, I will say this, as you can see in these two decks, it's a little hard to see, but this one, for instance, is wider, a little bit more square. I mean, it's still a rectangle, but a little bit more square, so it's going to be wider and a little shorter. Versus this other deck, which is a hair taller, but it's also thinner. I think you can see the back. Right, yeah. On both sides, maybe? There we go. So this one is a little taller and thinner. So again, these are just little differences that you might want to consider. It might have an impact on you. It might not. It's, again, up to each individual. Now here, we have the Wizards deck. This deck is actually out of print. You can find some people selling it. Unfortunately, it is going to be higher. But one thing I did want to discuss about this deck is it has a lot of the same sort of imagery. Some cards are a little bit different. So as you can see, this one is going to be referred to as the Initiate, while in the original, it's referred to as the Fool, or I shouldn't say original, but in the Rider-Waite, it's referred to as the Fool. So again, it's a little detail, but it is something that might make a difference because some of the words will be different, and occasionally decks have this. There is a corresponding card that it will work with in the Rider-Waite, but it's just different wording. Now, as you can see with this one, it's sort of a very similar aesthetic. This one, though, is what I would say is a little bit more digital. You can definitely tell it has some more computer, if you will, work done with it, versus something like the Rider-Waite, or something, this is known as the Tarot of the Celtic Fairies, which is a little bit more hand-drawn of a feel. So again, that would have to be something to do with your aesthetic. If that hand-drawn feel versus more, again, this one's a little bit more computer digitized, if you will. This is the Chakra Wisdom Tarot I'm holding. So again, that might be something that you would consider. Now, this one right here is out of print. It's the Legend of Arthurian Tarot. You can find these a little bit pricier than the original, but not as expensive for some reason as this one. I think this was in print for a little bit longer. So here we have the star. But the important thing about this one is because this is based in the Legend of Arthur Tarot, a lot of these cards, while having the traditional, for instance, Hermit, Star, they are also associated with moments from the Legend of Arthur. So this is, for instance, Lancelot in exile is who's going to be the Hermit, or the Fire Drake is going to be the Star. And so in that sense, sometimes the lore can sort of affect the definitions, or can add, if you will, a layer. It's not in a negative way, but it can often add this sort of layer to it. And again, this is more of sort of a hand-drawn feel to it. Now, as you can see here, this is the Celtic Fairies Tarot. That's probably one of my least favorite cards, even though it is the sun. It's just not as aesthetically pleasing to me. But for instance, here we have the Hermit. So again, since this is the Tarot of the Celtic Fairies, it's a little bit more whimsical. It's a little bit more sort of hand-drawn art, at least in appearance. And then on this last one, I wanted to take an extra moment to talk about the Chakra of the Wisdom Tarot. So as you can see, most of these have a very consistent border, whether it's decorative or just a very simple color, versus this deck has various colors. And the reason why is because this is sort of to be used as a deck to help with chakra as well. Whether it's through healing or whether it's through the reading and seeing how these are influencing your chakras, you know, that's something you're sort of going to have to get into with the book and decide. But that's why these are different colors. These are representing the different chakra colors and what these cards are associated with. So again, these cards, let's see if we can get another one here, are sort of highly computerized. Nothing wrong with it. It's just if your aesthetic is not drawn to it, that is something to consider when buying a deck. And these are a little bit wider as far as sitting in your hands, but they are also a little shorter, so they might make it a little easier for shuffling if that's an important thing to you. But again, these are all going to be longer than the standard sort of playing card deck. This stock is probably also a really good stock, very similar to the Rider Waite. The others are a little bit thinner, not necessarily something that is particularly make or break for me. But again, if you're using these a lot, if your hope is to eventually work with these, cardstock is something that will probably come into consideration. Okay, full up here. And so again, these cards have a little bit of a dual purpose because they are sort of meant to work with chakra systems. So again, it's really up to you. It's really what speaks to you. But again, as a reminder, some things that might play in mind, you can review cardstock. You can review just what aesthetically is pleasing to you, a little bit more of a digital feel versus a little bit more of a hand rendering sort of feel. But also, there are other things to consider. So, for instance, these cards have very feminine, heavy images. They are a little bit more diverse in that sense than in the original Rider Waite. As well as this one, again, that sort of heavier feminine imagery. Some people do find the Rider-Waite a little old school and a little bit less diverse. And there are decks that are very similar, again, in drawing. I believe it's the Modern Witch Tarot, that do show more diversity in their deck. So again, I will actually provide the links for these as well as some other decks. And some of them are more diverse than others, so these are all things to consider. And they're all things that will help sort of focus or even sort of draw your energy away depending on how you feel about them. So again, these are just some ideas, and hopefully you have found this helpful because a lot of people ask, but a lot of the sort of imagery does carry over, not exactly all of it, so it's just something that you have to sort of feel. And sometimes you will just literally feel when you are standing next to that card or that deck that this is a deck for you. The other thing that you can do is you can look up the names online. You can sort of go into Amazon and type in tarot decks. And what I would also do, or do sometimes, is if I see a deck I sort of like, the 3 or 4 cards in a little Amazon picture, I will then go to a general Google search. I'll look at images and I'll see if anyone has put more sort of pictures of the deck online. Sometimes they do the entire deck. Sometimes it might just be sort of like this, with partial sort of deck representation, usually with the major arcana. And again, this will give me a feel if it's a deck that's going to work for me or if it's something I'm going to like in the long term. Hopefully you found this helpful.